So you want to know how to can green beans. Literally, it's probably one of the easiest things you can start with. It's easier than jam even. So you take your string beans that you've just picked from your garden, and I usually hold them in my hands so that all the stem sides are up, and I just pop the stems off. I call it popping beans. And then I take my beans, maybe 2 or 3 at a time, and I snip them into bite-sized pieces like that. And since they just came out of the garden, I pick them in a basket and then I put them into the colander because that's where you're going to rinse them and they're going to be nice and clean. So let's just take a few more, go through the thing, and pick out your string beans, stem side up, just like that. Then pop the beans, bite-sized pieces. It's not, just make them how you like them. There's no tried and true way. Sometimes I make whole string beans in a jar, but I mostly like them popped because then it's easy in the winter time to just open a jar of green beans, stick it in a pan, heat it up, and you have a quick vegetable side for your dinner or lunch, whatever. And we just keep popping away. It has that nice, satisfying pop sound. Fresh string beans, fresh off the vine. This is the first harvest of my bush beans. Planted these beans probably just before mid-May, and now it's July 15th, so literally 2 months from seeds in the ground to sitting on the back porch getting ready to can. The nice thing about beans these days, which is different than when I was growing up, is that most of the varieties are what are considered stringless. So before you used to pop them and peel the string down, there's no strings anymore. Well, yeah, so that's never a thing. String beans used to always have strings. That's why they call them string beans. Now they call them green beans. They're just delicious. Had my first batch of fresh string beans last night for dinner, and they were so good. Okay, now that your green beans are all snipped, popped, and the tops are off, we're going to bring them in the house and wash them. So I just put them in the colander. I've got cold water. Just kind of rinse them around in here. They're not dirty. They just come out of the garden. There's nothing really on them, maybe dust or something, but in case there's a blossom end or a little bit of dirt, you don't want that in your canned string beans. You want them nice and clean. Just kind of fluff them around a little bit like that. Okay? Super easy. There. One last rinse just for good measure. And now I'm just going to give them a little shake. And I'm going to set them over here off to the side while I prepare my jars. So the next thing I do is wash my jars. I always put my jars away nice and clean, but just because it makes me happy, and I wouldn't even consider canning green beans in anything that might possibly be dirty. So I'm going to wash my jars. The typical canner holds 7 jars, so I'm going to prepare 7 pint-sized jars for canning. The canner holds 7 jars. They can be any size: pints, half pints, quarts, pint and a halves. Once you get up to the half gallons, obviously not so much. When my family was growing up at home, I mostly canned in quart-sized jars, but my kids are grown now, so I'm canning in pint-sized jars. I'm going to get this out of the way because I don't want to splash any soap into my string beans. Okay, so I'm just going to scrub each one of these. You want to pay particular attention to the rims because that's where the seal is made when you're canning. And you need spotlessly clean rims. Now remember, I've been canning for a while, so I've got lots of canning jars around. I keep my canning jars every year and put them away, washed and cleaned, so that makes it easy to pull them out in the fall. Sometimes I write on the outside of them, that had to go. Okay, so you're going to scrub each one of these jars, get it nice and clean, super hot water, as hot as you can stand. I don't have a sink stopper, so I usually just do them one at a time. You can wash them however you want. If you're using your dishwasher, run them through and put it for heat dry, because you want them just as sterile as you can get them. My dishwasher doesn't work, so I just do it the old-fashioned way. Besides that, it's so much faster than running a whole load of dishes just to get some clean jars for canning. Okay, and there you have it. Nice and good. Okay, so then I rinse them in the hottest water I possibly can. Now, it's not necessary that you dry the jars. You just want them really cleaned, as spotlessly clean as you can get. So my hands are very clean. And I just take the beans and then I put them in the jar, just like that. Kind of, hopefully, I have enough for 7 jars. If not, it's okay. I don't have to fill the canner all the way full. So I kind of tuck the green beans in there like that, right? So here we go. Scoop them up. Just dump them right into your jars. So easy. String beans are just so simple and so satisfying to do. Anybody can do that. Really, anybody can do it. So many, just the simplest things. You pop your string beans into bite-sized pieces, or whatever piece sizes you like. Take the stems off, obviously. Prepare your jars, hot, soapy, clean water. Get them as sterile as you can. Particular attention to the rims. We'll stuff more in there if we have more than we need. We'll really stuff these full. Because they, as they cook, they kind of shrink down a little bit. That's to be expected, right? Okay. Just stick it right in there. More than enough. Fill these 7 pints. And if you start canning your string beans, just, you know, this isn't taking me very long. I went out and picked the string beans this morning. It took me, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes to pick the string beans. And spend a few minutes cleaning them and popping them, prepping them, getting them in the jars. And once you get them in the canner, it's just a timing issue. So it's, if you do a canner every few days, before you know it, you have your whole winter supply of string beans ready to go. Okay, so we obviously have way more beans than we need to stuff these jars. So I'm going to really try and stuff them a little bit fuller. What you don't want is you don't want anything sticking over the rim, like this little tail right there. You really want to make sure and turn that in, so because those are the kind of things that'll prevent your jars from sealing correctly. And you want to have a good, tight, strong seal so your string beans will last. If they don't seal, you can't keep them. So the seal is the big deal. It's not hard to do. You just have to pay attention and a little attention to detail. See this little string bean tail sticking out? I'm going to turn that bean tail. Some people don't keep their bean tails, but I think they're cute, okay? So I keep mine. Only a couple more in these. Making sure that the tails do not stick over the rims where they can prevent your jar from sealing. Okay, so there we go. I still have extra beans. Probably have those for dinner tonight. Or I might make another couple jars full in a separate canner. Okay, the next thing we're gonna do is salt. When you're canning, just to make the flavor right, I use, for a pint, I use a half a teaspoon of salt per jar. So just a nice even half teaspoon. You just lay that in there on top. Make sure that it doesn't get any of it on the rim because we're trying to keep these rims pristine and clean. We're gonna go over that in another minute. Okay, so 1/2 teaspoon per jar. If you know, to taste, like if you tried it and you thought, oh my God, this were way too salty, you could do a 1/4 teaspoon. But it does help with the preservation of the beans, and it just gives them that good beany flavor when you open them this winter. Okay, the next thing we're gonna do is get filtered water and fill the jars. Okay, now we're gonna take filtered water. I just have it in whatever you have to pour out of, and you want to pour that in so the water comes about 1/2 inch from the rim. I usually use the bottom of the collar as kind of my guide. So you're going to fill each one of these jars up with water just to the rim. If you don't have a Brita filter or some way to filter your water, you can always buy filtered spring water at the grocery store. I don't like to use water out of the just tap because it could add unpleasant or different sort of flavors or taste, whatever your local water tastes like. You don't want to add anything unusual to your beans. You want them just to taste deliciously beany, I think, is the thing that I think of. So I have a water filtration system, and you want nice, clean. I start with cold water, but that's just because it is cold. It doesn't have to be any particular temperature because once you put it in the can, or the water will obviously heat up to above boiling. So there you have it. Get a little bit more here. You just don't want too much in there because, you know, as heat expands, you don't want it to blow the top off, because what you're looking for is that really good seal. But you do want enough water. Did I not put any in there? Oh, it's really short. There we go. Okay, so there we have all of our beans in the jars with 1/2 teaspoon of salt, then filled to just about here, half an inch down with filtered water. The next thing that you do, and I take like a half of a paper towel and fold it. This is where I take and go, make sure you're going around the rim of each of the jars. You want them dry, and you don't want anything on that rim that could prevent your jar lid from sealing. As long as it's inside the jar, it's fine. But you just take a little attention to detail. Go around each one of those rims. Make sure it's nice and dry, doesn't have any salt on it, doesn't have any water on it, doesn't have one of these little bean tails sticking out over the edge. It's a little fiddly, but generally, you know, I can't think of anything simpler. And here. Nice. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to take, I've got a thing of canning lids. I just you can buy, once you have your jars, all you ever have to do is then replace the lids. You cannot reuse a canning lid. It's a one-time only affair. I'll show these to you. This rubber part around the rim, that's the part that's going to seal and glue it shut. So I just set those right on top, one for each jar. Try not to get your fingers on the actual rims. I just try and keep them as untouched as possible. That way you're for sure going to get a really good seal. Okay. So the next thing you do is you take your rings, which came with the jars originally, but after you've used them the first time, you can reuse them as many times as you want. I just kind of snug it down, give it a nice little snug. It doesn't have to be real tight. Interestingly enough, when you take them out of the canner, they're all super loose. But for right now, just screw that on there nice and just snug. The other nice thing is once the jars are canned, you won't be needing the rings on there because they'll be solidly sealed. So if you can kind of poach the lids from other jars if you need to. Obviously, if you're brand new to this, you just bought your canning jars, so each one has its own brand new lid. These are used. They've been used for years. Okay, there we go. 7 beautiful jars of string beans that are ready to go in the canner. Now, let's see. How will I tell you this? I used to do canning in a water bath canner for years and years. It's just a big open kettle with an insert in it that you just set the jars in, and then you get the water up to boiling, and then you turn it down and simmer it. With a water bath, it takes 7 hours of actually boiling. So that's a long time. I can tell you that there was a lot of times I had to set my alarm clock for the middle of the night to get up to turn off my canner. So I ended up investing in, and I love, love, love it, is my All-American pressure cooker canner. There you go. So much easier, so much more efficient. So I just keep it in its box every year, tuck it away. It's kind of heavy. It's a nice big lid you have to be careful of. And then what a pressure cooker looks like. It's just a big, heavy-duty kettle, and it has a plate in the bottom. So the jars won't be resting exactly on the bottom. So here, I'm going to bring it over to the sink. Set it down in the sink like this. Hold on. Down into the sink. There we go. You can kind of see the spots where jars have been set over the years. So it holds 7 jars. You just place them right in there. And then I filled the old water bath was similar, except for you added more water. This one, I only need to add water till it comes up to about halfway up these jars. It's like 2.5 inches of water. So we're just going to let that fill up right there. Take off the counter some other dripping from there. Okay. Be a little bit efficient here. We're going to fill that up, and then I'm going to show you how to put the lid on. It's so easy. I'm just using cold water. You don't want to put hot water in. You always start with cold water. Also, if you have lots of beans and you're going to be doing more than one canner full, you always want to dump the old water out because you don't want to put a cold jar in the hot water, it'll crack and you'll lose your jars. Okay, so this lid has, I don't know if you can see it on there, a little arrow. I'm going to stick it on and it matches up with this notch right here. So you stick this on. Let me take this over to the stove. That'll be easier for you to see. Okay, hold on. I'm just going to take it over to the stove like this. Okay, here we are over at, I've got it set on the stove. It's pretty heavy when you lift it, but remember, here's that notch. Here's that arrow. So you set it down. There we go. And then you're just going to turn it. And it has these little hooks that are going to hook under these metal things. So it's not going to blow up. Like, that's the thing that most people are afraid of. And the old-fashioned ones are a lot scarier. But so you just turn it and these hooks come right under there. That arrow lines up with this notch. And then you start moving your tighteners up. You always go opposite to opposite. Don't tighten them down hard. You're just tighten them down loose to start with. And then here's this. So you have lots of safeguards on this. It has the hooks. So the lid is literally hooked underneath these metal things. You have these all on. Snug them up just a little bit. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it on for you, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. I turn it on really high because the main thing that you want, this is going to be your gauge, is you're going to bring it up to steam. For string beans, we're going to bring it up to, well, the first thing you do is you bring it up to steam until steam starts coming out of this little spout, and you're going to let it off steam like that for 7 minutes before you even start placing our selective weight on there, which will do the canning. Let me show you that. So this is the weight that we'll end up be putting on there. And because I'm going to bring string beans come up to, let's see, I have to look every year. This is the first batch this year, so just like to be sure. I don't need altitude adjustments. I'm at sea level. String beans. I've got pint jars. They're going to be 20 minutes at 10 pounds of pressure. 20 minutes at 10 pounds of pressure. So this little gizmo, wait, there it is. It has little numbers on it. So in the end, I'm going to set the 10 right on top of this little spout. We'll get there. But you read your directions. Always follow the directions for canning. So important. But okay, so this is just going to start to, the water is going to heat up. Everything's going to start the steam, and we'll come back and I'll show you when it's venting. And you'll know everything you need to know about string bean canning. Okay. Okay, I want you to see this. It's kind of hard to see. I'm going to put a piece of paper back here. But the steam vent is starting to vent. Can you see that at all? I've got the timer set. Do you see the little puffs of smoke coming up? This reminds me of, I was just saw Old Faithful for the first time. You stand around and wait, and it's like a puff. There it goes. Do you see it? Do you see a little bit of water and puff come out? It's a little bit like Old Faithful. So I've set the timer for 7 minutes, and at the end of 7 minutes, we're going to put that weight on there on the 10 mark, like I showed you, and then we're going to wait for this to come up to, if you can see this, we're going to wait for this to come up to 10 pounds of pressure, right about there on the dial. That's right. And so that's the next thing. So we're just going to sit here and wait now. Now it's 7 minutes, okay? It's going to be coming out a lot. Okay, now you can really see the steam coming out a lot more. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, I'm a little bit impatient, so maybe you're supposed to time it from when it's doing this, but I always time it from when I very first see the steam, because I'm just anxious to get going. And you know what? It's always worked out for me. Okay, so that's the end of our 7 minutes. It's off gassing really well. Take this little thing with a 10 mark, and I'm going to set that 10. It's got a little hole in it, see? At the bottom, each one of those numbers. So I'm going to set that right on my vent pipe. Now comes the fun part. This is the part where the dial starts to go up. So we're going to wait for it until it gets up to 10 pounds of pressure. And the 10 is on the inside of this ring right there. Do you see it? I'm being regular with this. This is my first time videoing for you guys. I'm sure I'll get better with practice. Okay, we're just going to give that a couple of minutes. And let's see. I waited from, what time is it now? It's 11:30. So we turned this on. I turned the pot on at about 11 o'clock. So it took approximately 30 minutes on a high heat setting. I'm using a gas stove. I've got it way up high on my biggest burner. It took me essentially 30 minutes to get it up to steam and to do the 7 minutes of off gassing. And you see that dial's just starting to move. It's going to creep right up there. We don't need to watch it the whole entire time because you know what they say. Well, watch pot actually is boiling. It's boiling like mad in there. You can hear it. Can you hear it? This is so fun. It's like magic, I tell you. Just like magic. Anyway, green beans are in the pot. We'll come back when the dial gets up to 10, okay? And all we're going to do when it gets up to 10 is we're going to turn the stove down until it gets to a temperature that will hold it steady at approximately 10 pounds of pressure for 20 minutes. So it'll be 20 minutes at 10 pounds of pressure. We'll be back. Watch that dial. Okay, see, now that we're right at the 10 pounds thing. I'm going to set the timer right now for 20 minutes. Set my timer for 20 minutes. And I'm going to start turning the gas down a little bit, and I'm going to keep an eye on this. I think that I can turn the gas down quite a bit because once it's up to steam, it really stays up to steam. So I've turned it down 3/4 of the way. Timer set for 20 minutes. I'm just going to keep an eye on that every few minutes to make sure it doesn't go over 12 pounds of pressure. Okay, and that's it, 20 minutes, and then we're going to come back and I'll show you how we stop it. Okay, here we are, it's 20 minutes, so I'm literally just going to turn the oven or the stovetop all the way off. Now what happens is we wait for this dial to move all the way back down to 0. I, in the past, have been super impatient and I've just taken that thing off, but oh my God, don't do that. That's the little doohickey that was just bouncing around over there. Oh my God, then you'll just have a blast of steam, and that's actually very, very dangerous. You could burn yourself terribly badly, so don't do that. So we're just going to give this some time. I will set my timer and see how long it takes, and then until it gets down to 0, and I will let you know. Okay, here we are. It's been approximately 25 minutes. And as you can see, that dial is literally almost down to 0. So, as I said, I tend to be a little bit impatient. So, using a hot pad, because remember, this is very hot. Everything here is really hot. I'm just going to lift this up. You hear that? Okay, still a little bit of steam coming out, but it's kind of back down. This is so fun. You're going to see it get opened up. And so I'm going to start slowly undoing the things, and then we're going to lift the jars out of there. And you'll see that they're literally still boiling. even though it has been now 26 minutes since we turned off the heat. So one by one, I'm just going to slowly let these down. Remember, we work in a pattern across from each other. So just unscrew them, let them down. This is going to come down. And then the arrow is going to turn. The hooks are going this way, so we turn this way. Lift this off. I'm going to show you down inside here. You see it's still literally boiling. These are very hot. I'm going to use what's called a jar lifter to gently lift them out of there, and then I'm going to set them right here on my counter where I have set a towel. And the towel's not 100% necessary. This is a jar lifter. So I just reach in, grab the jar, lift it out, and set it on either just the clean counter or a towel. The reason I use a towel a lot is so there's not the shocking difference between the hot and the cold of the jar and the counter, because I don't want to crack any of these jars. Just one by one, set them out. So do you see how the beans rise up in the jar and the empty spaces at the bottom? I think that's so cute. It's like taking clay out of the kiln. It's always so interesting to see what you get. Okay, here they are. And I don't want to leave the timer on long enough for you to hear them pop. But at this point, I don't know if you can kind of see it, the part of the lid is still domed up. So as the jars of the string beans cool down, each one of those lids is going to go pop. And it's going to suction that little nipple right here in the middle. It's going to go inward. It's going to invert. And that's how you know the jars are sealed. They'll make a satisfying pop. So here's the water bath now. I'm going to go ahead and empty it because I'm going to run my remainder for jars of beans. So I want to start again with cold water in my canner. And that's it. That's 7 pints of string beans canned. Total time that it took was, let's see, what time is it now? It's 12:40. I probably start maybe 10:30 to pick the string beans. So I've got a couple hours into it. Very little time actually working. I've been out weeding the garden and doing other chores around the house while the canner just did his job and steamed for 20 minutes. So there you have it. Canned string beans, fresh from the garden, delicious treats to take out in the winter time to enjoy. I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Bye. Until next time, this has been Dani in the kitchen, and I look forward to seeing you again. Bon appetit.